and welcome to episode 9 of Project Milano. Now I have Milano printed and assembled, I can make any adjustments needed to the files prior to their final release. Although as you're watching this video, the files are already available to buy through my website. There's a link in the description. With all the outside of Milano complete, I need to turn my attention to the cockpit, and more importantly, the crew. I began this build almost 2 years ago with the interior, and after a few distractions, I can now finally complete the design and printing of this amazing ship. I can manage the hard surface modelling of Milano, but for the crew I need to use a totally different CAD modelling technique, sculpting. I'm going to be using the industry standard sculpting software, Zbrush. It's been around for quite a few years and has been constantly evolving into a very powerful package used on all the big Hollywood movies. With skill it can be used to create photorealistic 3D models of humans, sci-fi and fantasy figures. It can also be used for hard surface modelling, like Cinema 4D, which I used for Milano and all my other builds. Being all new to Zbrush, I had a lot to learn, and it's always a steep learning curve with any 3D modelling software. I've been watching YouTube tutorials for a few months now, but the guys who do them drink way too much coffee, and they aren't easy to follow. I ended up going onto Udemy, an online tutorial site, and for just a few pounds I found a great course for beginners like me. Okay, let's fire it up and see how Zbrush works. To say Zbrush has its quirks is an understatement. As an example, the menu bar at the top of the screen, instead of being in the usual order of File, Edit, etc., is arranged alphabetically. Why? I have no idea, and this is just one minor issue compared to some of the other weirdness of Zbrush. The designers kind of did their own thing, which does frustrate us newbies. Anyway, let me show you what it does. Basically, using a variety of different brushes, you can sculpt the surface of any high-resolution object. Here symmetry is turned on, and I'm using a small brush to draw on the surface. Brushes can be used to add or subtract from the surface. Brush size and pressure can all be adjusted. There's a large section of brushes to choose from, and you can download even more. It's recommended to use a pen and a tablet with Zbrush, but I couldn't get on with mine, so I stuck with my mouse. It's a very powerful program, and I hope to use it to add figures to many of my future builds, where figures play a crucial part in the subject. So you don't have to start from scratch every time you want to sculpt a figure, several basic models are included. The figure is in what's known as the T-pose, where all figure sculpting starts. Here you can see details of the mesh structure that makes up the figure. The higher the resolution, the better the detail, but the bigger the file size. It's a trade-off, especially when designing files for downloading. Fortunately, the crew of Milano will only be in 1/48 scale, so we don't need maximum resolution. Using reference images, I started with Drax, as he would be the simplest on many levels. Here I've started modifying the base model, just working on Drax's upper body. This is the first time I've used Zbrush, so go easy on me. There's still a long way to go, but roughing in is always the first stage. Then you start to refine, apparently. A couple of confusing days later, and having learned a lot, Drax is ready to be posed in his seat. Checking reference photos is crucial, not only to get the detail right, but also capture the character of the subject, whether it's a figure or a ship. Now for the part I found the hardest, posing the sculpted figure. And here's Drax, scaled and posed in his seat, matching the final scene of the first movie. He's not perfect, but for my first attempt I'm thrilled, and being in 1/48 scale, he'll look absolutely fine. I now import Drax into Cinema 4D, where I add his knives and strap him into his seat. Drax is now complete, and just waiting for me to finish the rest of the crew, so they can all get printed together. Next I moved on to Rocket, holding Groot in the plant pot. I didn't have a base model for Rocket, so sculpted him from scratch, which was another learning experience. With the base model created, Rocket was detailed and posed in the same way as Drax. His bushy tail was added and draped over the side of the seat, and he was now ready for printing. Finally, I was on to Star-Lord and Gamora. Here I could again use the base models, but they weren't without their own challenges. Every subject throws up something new to solve, and I always find it rewarding when I learn something new, solve a problem, and create something along the way. With Star-Lord and Gamora, getting their hair right was a real challenge, particularly Gamora's. I'm pleased with how they came out, and it was a lot of fun when I knew what I was doing. Whenever I finish the design stage, I find creating a few rendered images always helps me judge if I've got things right. Here you can see the full crew in the cockpit, and I reckon they don't look too bad. When you realise a 6-foot tall figure in 1/48 scale will only be 38mm tall, the level of detail in these figures is very high. Now I can get all of the crew and the cockpit details finally printed. I've filled the build plate with parts, so I have plenty of spares just in case something doesn't print or I break something removing the supports. This print job was run on my Elegoo Jupiter SE, just like the rest of Milano, but this time I set the layer height to 20 microns to capture all that juicy detail. And here's the prints in the space grey ABS-like resin. At 20 microns I can see no layer lines and the detail is incredible on all the parts. Everything's really crisp. Once the supports are removed, there should be no cleaning up needed. I may have gone slightly overkill with the supports, but everything on the build plate printed, so that's a massive relief. After a great tip from one of you guys in the comments, yes, I always read them and respond, I removed the supports while softening the parts in hot water. This made life so much easier, with everything coming away cleanly and no damage to the parts. I added a fine rod to Rocket's plant pot with a dab of superglue on the tip to represent Groot. At last, the prints were revealed in all of their detail. Finally, it was time to prime and paint everything. For priming, I had a few options. A car rattle can would be great for the large parts of Milano, as I had a lot of acreage to cover, but it was a cannon that would flood the parts and I'd lose all the detail. I looked at the new No Pill primer from VMS, but again was concerned about build-up. Eventually, I chose Surfacer Grey by SMS. It's lacquer-based, so you need to take care and use cellulose thinners to clean up, but it covers really well. I gave everything cockpit-related a coat of this primer. Being solvent-based, it dries in seconds, making the chance of getting any runs almost zero. Coverage is great, but spraying grey on grey can be challenging to check coverage. I decided SMS was going to be my paint of choice for Milano, and started by giving all the cockpit parts a coat of SMS aluminium. The SMS metallics settle out really quickly, so making sure the bottle's well shaken and starting spraying quickly is a good idea. All the parts were then hand painted with acrylics, before being given a wash with oils to pick out the details. The display screens were painted in red, and indicators of graphics were added in dark yellow. These were then gloss varnished. I was worried that the figures would be difficult to paint in their seats, but the opposite was the case. They were easier to handle and everything was accessible. Again, acrylics and an oil wash. Star-Lord was straightforward to paint. Care just had to be taken with the faces on all the figures. Given the size, they came out really well. I really enjoyed painting Rocket. He's my favourite Guardian. Getting his markings correct was very important. Again, just acrylics and an oil wash. Gamora was probably the simplest to paint. I just had to be careful with her skin tone to get the right shade of green. There is a continuity issue at the end of the film with her belt buckle, but I went for the classic version. So that's the figures. What about the rest of the cockpit? Well, with everything base coated in aluminium again, it was acrylics and oils. Using good quality acrylics by either Vallejo or AK is crucial and will reward you with a great finish that's easy to brush paint. Varying mixes of burnt umber and French ultramarine oils were used throughout Milano. It's time to start some final assembly. Let's begin with the rear cockpit. The left and right display consoles are fitted to the side walls first. These are handed, so only fit one way. They're painted in the same style as the front instrument panel. The display screens are then attached to the ceiling. These are quite delicate and again only fit one way. Eventually, you should end up with something like this. The floor between the front seats has a hole pattern that's too fine to print cleanly, so I designed a decal which I printed on my inkjet printer. The rear seats are also handed and can now be fitted. The main colour for the floor is a dirty pale grey, with the front upper sidewalls painted a dark grey. Everything is then given an oil wash. The rear cockpit can then be added, taking care not to damage the seats. From the back this unit looks great. Sadly, not much of it will be seen when Milano is complete. To close off the back of the cockpit, the rear wall is added. This locates positively in place. The power pods are then attached to the sidewalls, about halfway along the cockpit. Large holes and pins ensure a good location. And that's all the parts that need to be glued in at this stage. The rest of the interior and crew will be fixed in once the rest of Milano has been assembled and painted. But let's see how it all looks as a test fit. We'll start by adding Drax, seated at the centre of the cockpit. Next we fit the two arms which attach to the back of the two front seats. Then Star-Lord and Rocket can be carefully fitted to the floor and seat arms. With the instrument panel added, finally Gamora can take her place behind Star-Lord. The cockpit is a complex space and varies throughout the movie, but this is the final version, and I hope you like it. It's great to see all the Guardians together, albeit with a newborn Groot. There's certainly plenty of scope to add more detail, and even lighting to the interior to really show it off, but this is the base model, as printed from my files. I hope I've captured the final scene. Let me know what you think in the comments. The next episode will be the last in the series, where we'll see the final painting process, with Milano completed and ready for our show. Of course, if you're in North Devon on August the 17th, you'll be very welcome to visit our show and see Milano and many more models in person. If you can't wait until then, you can see the photographs of the finished model on my website, where you can also purchase the files and print your own Milano. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Project Milano. If you have, please share with your friends and make sure you subscribe to my channel. So you catch my next video when it goes live, click on the bell icon. To learn about some of the techniques I use, check out my how-to series to find out more about moulding, casting, CAD design and 3D printing. If you have any questions about Project Milano, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.